The detective set a small speaker on the metal table. He pressed play. A woman's voice filled the room, clear and calm. "How was your coffee this morning?" And then the recording kept going. And Jennifer Crum stopped smiling. Not slowly, not eventually, right then, in that moment. The smile just vanished, and what replaced it was something I have seen only a handful of times in 28 years of homicide work. Fear, pure and absolute. My name is Marcus Cole. I spent 8 years with the NYPD and 20 years with the Chicago Unsolved Homicides Task Force. I have worked over 300 murder cases, and I am going to tell you exactly what happened in one of the most calculated poisonings this country has seen in years. If you are new here, hit subscribe, because this is the kind of case that will make you rethink every relationship you have ever trusted. And if you are already part of this community, leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done. What would you have seen? Because most people in this situation never see it coming. Oklahoma, the state that people drive through to get somewhere else. Flat land, small towns, churches on every corner, and a reputation for being quiet. But quiet does not mean safe. Quiet means nobody is watching closely enough to see what is happening behind closed doors. In November of 2021, in a modest home in rural Oklahoma, a 41-year-old woman named Jennifer Crum was teaching 7th grade science at a middle school 30 minutes from her house. She was good at her job, the kind of teacher who stayed late, who tutored students before standardized tests, who coached the science fair team on weekends. Her colleagues described her as patient, organized, deeply caring about her students. Her students loved her, parents trusted her, and she was married to a man named Curtis Crum, a 44-year-old electrician who worked for a local contractor. They had been married for 16 years. They had 2 children together, a 12-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son. On paper, this was a stable, middle-class Oklahoma family. A teacher and an electrician, 2 kids, a house with a yard, a dog maybe. Normal. But normal is the most dangerous word in my vocabulary, because normal is what we project. Normal is what we show the neighbors, the church group, the co-workers. Normal is a performance. And behind that performance, for 3 months, Jennifer Crum was slowly murdering her husband. It started around September of 2021. Curtis began feeling sick. Nothing dramatic at first. Nausea in the morning, a dull headache that would not go away. General fatigue that he attributed to working overtime at a job site. He went to his primary care doctor. The doctor ran basic blood work and told him he was probably just stressed. Told him to rest more, eat better, reduce his caffeine intake. Curtis trusted his doctor. He trusted his wife. When he came home feeling sick, Jennifer was there with soup, with concern, with a fresh cup of coffee. Every single morning. That is the detail that haunts me about this case. She did not have to do that. She could have ignored it, but she made sure he drank that coffee every single morning, because that is where she was putting it. That is where she was putting the arsenic. Arsenic. Let me tell you about arsenic, because if you are going to understand this case, you need to understand the weapon. Arsenic is a metalloid. It occurs naturally in the environment in trace amounts, but in concentrated form, it is one of the most effective poisons ever used by human beings. It has been called the king of poisons, the poison of kings, the inheritance powder. For centuries, it was the preferred method for eliminating unwanted husbands, wives, business partners. And the reason it was so popular is simple. It is colorless, odorless, and tasteless when properly diluted. You can mix it into food or drink, and the victim will taste nothing. That is exactly what Jennifer Crum discovered. She did not accidentally stumble onto this. She researched it. Detectives would later confirm that she had been searching online for terms related to arsenic poisoning, symptoms of arsenic exposure, and how to detect arsenic in the body. This was not a crime of passion. This was a project. This was planned, and it was patient. By October of 2021, Curtis was significantly worse. The nausea had escalated to frequent vomiting. He was losing weight at an alarming rate. His skin had developed a grayish ashen tone. His hair was beginning to thin. His fingernails had developed horizontal lines called Mees lines, which are a classic indicator of heavy metal poisoning. His hands trembled when he held his coffee cup. He went back to the doctor. The doctor this time ran a more comprehensive panel. But Oklahoma in 2021 was dealing with a pandemic. Medical resources were stretched. The lab took longer than usual to process results. And in that window, Curtis got worse. He was hospitalized for 3 days in late October with what doctors initially believed was a severe gastrointestinal infection. They gave him fluids, anti-nausea medication, and sent him home. Jennifer was there to pick him up. Jennifer made him coffee when he got home. Jennifer drove him to his follow-up appointments and sat in the waiting room, holding his hand through the door. The doctors were baffled. They could not figure out why a healthy 44-year-old electrician was deteriorating so rapidly. They tested for everything: hepatitis, autoimmune disorders, celiac disease, cancer. They found nothing because they were not testing for the things she was putting in his cup every morning. By November, Curtis could no longer work. He was too weak to stand for more than a few hours. He had developed severe peripheral neuropathy, a condition that causes nerve damage in the extremities. His feet went numb, then his hands. He could not grip tools. He could not do his job. His employer let him go. And here's what kills me about this part of the story. Jennifer told people her husband was sick. She told the school her husband was battling a mysterious illness. She posted on social media about praying for his recovery. She set up a GoFundMe to help with medical bills. She played the part of the devoted wife so perfectly that when investigators later reviewed her digital footprint, they found posts about hospital visits, prayers, and hope, all while she was the one putting the poison in his cup every morning, after she kissed him good morning, after she told him she loved him, after she poured his coffee into the mug she had bought him as an anniversary gift 3 years earlier. Now let me tell you how this investigation actually started, because it was not a doctor who figured it out. It was not a concerned friend. It was a nurse. A single nurse at the hospital where Curtis was admitted for the 3rd time in December of 2021. Her name was not released publicly, and that is a shame, because she is the reason this case got solved. She was reviewing his chart, and something about the pattern of symptoms did not sit right with her. She had been a nurse for 19 years. She had seen a lot of poisonings in her career, mostly accidental, some not. And she looked at Curtis Crumb's chart, and she saw a man whose body was systematically shutting down in a way that did not match any known natural illness. The symptoms were too broad, too scattered, too perfectly consistent with heavy metal exposure. She flagged it to the attending physician. The attending physician agreed. And on December 14, 2021, a toxicology screen was ordered, specifically testing for arsenic. When the results came back, the attending physician called the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Curtis Crumb had extremely elevated levels of arsenic in his blood and urine, not trace amounts, not environmental exposure, lethal, sustained, chronic arsenic poisoning. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Sergeant Denise Whitfield, and I have to tell you, she did exceptional work on this one. She went to the Crumb house with a search warrant that same night. She seized the coffee maker, the coffee filters, several mugs, and Jennifer Crumb's cell phone. She also seized the small brown bottle from the garage that was later identified as a commercial herbicide containing high concentrations of arsenic trioxide. The bottle was half empty. Curtis had been poisoned for approximately 3 months. And when Sergeant Whitfield reviewed Jennifer Crumb's internet search history from the past 6 months, she found the searches that sealed it. How much arsenic to kill an adult? Symptoms of arsenic poisoning versus food poisoning. How long does arsenic stay in the bloodstream? Can arsenic be detected in a routine blood test? Jennifer Crumb had researched her own murder weapon. She had planned it, she had executed it, and she had done it in the most intimate way possible, 1 cup of coffee at a time. Now let me talk about that interrogation, because this is where the case shifted from evidence to theater. Sergeant Whitfield brought Jennifer Crumb in for questioning on December 16, 2021. Curtis was still in the hospital, too weak to speak. Their children were with Jennifer's mother, and Jennifer walked into that police station believing she was untouchable. She believed the search warrant had found nothing. She believed her internet searches were private. She believed her story would hold. She sat in that interview room and she smiled at the detective. She smiled. That is the detail that everyone who covers this case mentions, and nobody can explain. Not the poison, not the planning, the smile. She smiled at the detective like she was sitting across from an old friend at a coffee shop. She was calm, cooperative, almost cheerful, and Sergeant Whitfield let her run that performance for 45 minutes. Let her talk about her husband, about the kids, about how worried she was, about how she just wanted this nightmare to end. And then the detective did something very simple. She placed a single sheet of paper on the table in front of Jennifer Crum. It was the toxicology report. Arsenic levels in her husband's blood. And she told Jennifer she knew what she had been doing. And then she played the tape. The tape was a recording from a concealed audio device that detectives had placed in the Crum house after obtaining a second warrant. They had been recording conversations in the home for 72 hours prior to the interrogation. The recording captured Jennifer, alone in the kitchen, talking to herself as she prepared Curtis's morning coffee. And on that recording, made on November 8th, 2021, Jennifer Crum was heard saying the words, "You are going to keep getting worse until you finally die, and then everything will be better for all of us." That is what was on the tape. That is what Detective Whitfield played for her in that interrogation room. That is why the smile vanished. Not because she was caught, because she heard her own voice, saying the things she thought nobody would ever know she said. I want to pause here and talk about what I saw in that interrogation footage. I have reviewed thousands of interrogations in my career. Most people, when they are caught, they break down, they cry, they apologize, they make excuses. Jennifer Crum did something different, and I need you to understand this because it is important. When that tape played and she heard her own voice, her face went through 3 distinct phases in approximately 4 seconds. First, confusion, like she could not believe what she was hearing. Second, recognition, the realization that this was real, that it was her, that there was no getting around it. And third, and this is the one that still bothers me, she went completely still, not emotional, not reactive, just a sudden, total stillness. That stillness is what I look for in an interrogation. That is the moment when a person realizes the game is over and their brain is already calculating their next move. That is not the face of someone who is innocent. That is the face of someone who has been caught mid-plan. The forensic evidence in this case was overwhelming. The arsenic bottle from the garage matched the chemical signature of the arsenic found in Curtis's blood. His hair strand analysis, which can show a timeline of heavy metal exposure going back months, showed a consistent pattern of arsenic ingestion beginning in late September 2021. The concentration in his hair increased over time, which is exactly what you would expect if someone was dosing a victim gradually. The coffee maker was tested and found to contain trace amounts of arsenic residue. And Jennifer's internet search history documented the timeline from research to action. Sergeant Whitfield put together a case file that was, in my professional opinion, airtight. There was no reasonable doubt left. There was not even unreasonable doubt left. Jennifer Crum was arrested on December 16, 2021, and charged with first-degree murder. She was held without bond. Curtis Crum remained in the hospital for 4 more months. He survived, but the damage was extensive. The peripheral neuropathy was permanent in his hands. He had chronic kidney damage. He had memory and concentration issues that persisted long after the arsenic was out of his system. He was 44 years old when this started. By the time the trial began, he walked with a cane. That is who Jennifer Crum did that to, the father of her children, the man who trusted her with his life, literally. She did not kill him, but she destroyed him. Now, I need to tell you something about poisonings, because in my 20 years with the Chicago Unsolved Homicides Task Force, I saw more poisonings than most people would believe. And I need you to understand the psychology behind it. Poisoning is not a crime of passion. It is not a crime of opportunity. It is a crime of patience and control. A person who poisons someone is saying, I want this person dead, but I am not willing to look them in the eye when I do it. They want the result without the confrontation. They want to be able to tell themselves and everyone else that they did not really kill anyone, that the poison did it, that they were just there, that they are a victim too. Jennifer Crum had 3 months to stop. 3 months of watching her husband get sicker and sicker. 3 months of holding his hand at the hospital and crying to the nurses about how scared she was. 3 months to choose differently. She did not. That is the part of this story that matters most. The poison is a tool. The choice is the crime. Let me tell you about a case from my own career. 2009, Chicago South Side. A woman named Dorothy Merritt had been poisoning her husband of 30 years with thallium, another heavy metal. He was sick for 8 months before anyone figured it out. 8 months of doctors telling him he had everything from lupus to depression to heavy metal exposure from his job at a factory. They tested him for everything except thallium because thallium testing was expensive and uncommon. By the time they caught it, Gerald Merritt was blind, permanently blind. Dorothy told everyone who would listen that she did not know how it happened, that she felt so helpless, that she prayed every night for God to heal her husband. Dorothy Merritt sat by his bedside for 8 months, performing the role of the devoted wife. When she was eventually caught and convicted, her defense attorney tried to argue diminished capacity. The jury did not buy it. She got 20 years. She will be 78 when she gets out. Gerald died in 2011, 2 years into her sentence. He never saw her convicted. Dorothy Merritt and Jennifer Crum followed the same playbook. Patient, methodical, emotionally detached enough to do the thing, but emotionally engaged enough to perform for the audience. That is the profile. That is what Sergeant Whitfield was looking for when she walked into that interrogation room. The gap between the performance and the truth. The trial of Jennifer Crum began in March of 2023. It lasted 11 days. The prosecution called 23 witnesses. They presented the forensic evidence, the internet search history, the toxicology reports, and most devastatingly, the audio recording. The defense tried to argue that Jennifer had been framed, that the internet searches were innocent research, that the arsenic in Curtis's system came from environmental contamination in their well water. The problem with that defense was the recording. The defense had no explanation for the recording. They tried to argue it was taken out of context, but the context was exactly what Jennifer said it was. She wanted Curtis dead, and she believed she was alone when she said it. She was not alone. There was a microphone in her kitchen, and everything she said on that tape became evidence in a courtroom 18 months later. Jennifer Crum did not take the stand in her own defense. Her attorneys rested after the prosecution's case. That is a decision defense attorneys make when they believe the evidence is too strong to counter with testimony. On March 24, 2023, the jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, aggravated battery by poison, child endangerment. The children had been living in that house for 3 months while their father was being poisoned in the next room. That was the child endangerment charge. They were 12 and 10. They were eating breakfast at the same table where their mother was preparing their father's death. That is the part of this story that I cannot get past. Not the poisoning, the casualness of it. The way she incorporated the children into the scenery of the crime. Sentencing was handed down on June 2nd, 2023. The prosecutor asked for life without parole. The defense asked for 15 to 20 years. The judge gave the maximum. 2 consecutive life sentences plus 20 years. Jennifer Crum will be eligible for parole in 2041 when she is 63 years old. She will not see her children grow up. She will not hold a classroom again. She will spend the rest of her productive years in a cell in Oklahoma. And when people ask her what she did, she will have to say, I poisoned my husband for 3 months and I thought I would get away with it. Curtis Crum was present at the sentencing. He sat in the front row of the gallery and he did not cry. He did not shout. He just sat there and looked at her. and she did not look back. She kept her eyes on the floor for the entire duration of the judge's statement. The courtroom was silent. Even the journalists, who cover hundreds of trials a year, said they had never seen a room so quiet. The children. I have to talk about the children because they are the ones who will live with this longest. They were 12 and 10 when their father was poisoned. They are 14 and 12 now. They know what their mother did. The court ordered supervised visitation, which in a case like this means once a month in a monitored setting with a counselor present. Their therapists have reportedly told the court that the children are progressing, but that the long-term psychological impact of discovering your mother tried to kill your father is something that will follow them into adulthood in ways nobody can fully predict. They will spend the rest of their lives knowing that the person who was supposed to protect them tried to destroy their family. That is the legacy Jennifer Crum left them. This case had all the elements that I find most instructive for people to understand. It had planning. Jennifer researched the poison before she used it. It had access. She lived with the victim and prepared his food every day. It had patience. 3 months of daily dosing. It had performance. She presented herself to the world as a devoted wife and caring teacher while she was systematically murdering her husband. And it had one critical flaw. She talked to herself. She thought she was alone, and she said the thing out loud and a microphone captured it. That is what solved this case. Not the toxicology test, though that started it. Not the internet searches, though those confirmed it. The microphone in the kitchen. The moment she let her guard down for 4 seconds and said what she really believed. That is always how these cases crack. Not the big move, the small moment, the slip. If you are watching this and you are in a relationship where something feels wrong, trust that instinct. If you know someone who is mysteriously sick and the doctors cannot figure out why, ask questions. Push for answers. Because poisoning is one of the hardest crimes to detect and one of the easiest to get away with if nobody is paying attention. The nurse who flagged Curtis Crum's chart saved his life. If she had not been paying attention, if she had not trusted her gut, Curtis would be dead and Jennifer Crum would be teaching science to a classroom of 7th graders right now. That is the difference one observant person can make. This is Marcus Cole for C9 True Crime. I will see you in the next one. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you had been in that interrogation room and you were Jennifer Crum and the tape started playing, what would you have done? Would you have kept the smile or would you have broken? Leave a comment. I read every single one. And if this case affected you the way it affected me, share this video. Because the only thing that keeps these stories from repeating is people paying attention. Subscribe, hit the bell, and remember, the most dangerous people are the ones who smile while they are destroying you. I will see you in the next one.